One of the most persistent and entertaining types of ghost stories is that of the phantom or vanishing hitchhiker. It's also one of the most chilling because it brings ghosts in very close contact with mortals. More disconcerting still, the stories depict the spectres as looking, acting and sounding like living people, even physically interacting with the unsuspecting drivers who pick them up. The dancing ghost. This story has many of the classic elements. It takes place in Tompkinsville, Kentucky. Two young men are on their way to dance when they spot a girl their age walking along the road in a party dress. They stop and ask if she'd like to attend the dance with them. She accepts and spends the evening dancing with them. When the dance is finished, the young men offer to take her home, and she insists they drop her off at a certain spot. They agree, and since it's raining, one of the boys gives her his coat, saying he will pick it up from her later. As she requests, they drop off at her house in Meshack Road. A few days later, the boy returns to the house to retrieve his coat, but is told by the woman at the house that the girl he describes sounds like her daughter who died in an accident on that road. When the boy visits her grave at the cemetery, his coat is laying beside her tombstone. The girl on the side of the road. The Vanishing Hitchhiker relates the story of one Dr. Eckersole, who, while driving home from a country club dance, picks up a lovely young girl dressed in a sheer evening gown. She climbs into the back seat of the car because his front passenger seat is crowded with golf clubs and gives him an address to take her to. As he arrives at the address, he turns to speak to her, and she's gone. The curious doctor knocks on the door of the address given to him by the mysterious girl. A grey-haired man answers the door and reveals that the girl was his daughter, who died in a car accident nearly 2 years ago. The basketball player. It's a winter evening in Oklahoma in 1965. May Doria, driving to her sister's house from Tulsa to the Pryor, sees a hitchhiker on the side of the road. She stops for him. He gets to the front seat alongside her. As they make their way down Highway 20, during the conversation the boy says that he is a basketball player for a local school, and May reckons that indeed he has the height and build of an athlete. She also notices that he's not wearing a jacket of any kind, despite the fact that it is winter. And the boy seems to have no particular destination in mind. He points to a culvert on the side of the road and asks to be let out there. May is puzzled because there are no houses or lights anywhere near in sight. Before she can even pull over, however, the youth simply vanishes from the car. May immediately stops the car, gets out and looks around, but there is no sign of the boy. May later learns in a chance conversation with a utility worker that the same phantom hitchhiker was first picked up at the same spot in 1936, 29 years earlier. Resurrection Mary. The story of Resurrection Mary is considered one of the most famous ghosts in Chicagoland. The story begins on another winter night in 1934 when a young girl was killed in an auto accident while on her way home from the O. Henry Ballroom on Archer Avenue in Justice Third, a suburb of Chicago. 5 years later, in 1939, a cab driver picks up a young girl in a white gown on Archer Avenue. She sits in the front seat and instructs him to drive north on Archer. After driving a short distance, she suddenly tells him to stop and simply vanishes from the cab. The cab is stopped in front of Resurrection Cemetery, where the girl is buried. According to a 1977 account, a woman may have seen Mary locked inside the iron fence of the cemetery. Reportedly, the metal bars bore the imprints of her hands. The Flapper Ghost. The ghost of an attractive young Jewish girl dressed in the fashion of the Roaring Twenties, hence the Flapper Ghost, is said to hitch rides on the Dupont Avenue in Chicago. According to the story, during the 1930s, she would appear at the Melody Mill Ballroom, looking quite alive and human and dancing with the young men. She would ask for a ride home, and then ask to be dropped off at the Jewish Waldheim Cemetery, saying she lived in the caretaker's house. The girl would then dash into the cemetery and vanish among the tombstones. One of the last reported sightings of this ghost was in 1979, when she was spotted by police walking from the ballroom towards the cemetery, where she again disappeared. The Smoking Ghost. On a night in February 1951, a British officer stops a fellow soldier hitchhiking on the road. The stranger is dressed in Royal Air Force uniform, and after he gets into the car with the officer, asks if he can have a cigarette. The officer gives him one of his Camels and a lighter with which to light it. With his peripheral vision, the officer sees the flash of the lighter, but then turning his head, is astonished to see that his passenger has vanished into thin air. Only the cigarette lighter remains on the seat. Hitchhike Annie. During the 1940s, a young girl in a white dress is said to be seen hitchhiking on Calvary Drive in St. Louis. The pretty girl, with pale complexion and long dark hair, would tell the drivers who picked her up that her car had broken down or was otherwise stranded. Just as they passed the Bellefontaine Cemetery, the girl who has become known as Annie would vanish from the car. The grandmother. C.B. Colby tells the story of the hitchhiker to Montgomery, in which two businessmen on the way to Montgomery, Alabama, stop for a little old lady in a lavender dress walking on the side of the road in the middle of the night. She tells them she's going to see her daughter and granddaughter, and they offer to drive her to the next town. On the way, she proudly tells them all about her children and grandchildren, the names, where they live, and so on. After a while, the men become engrossed in their own business conversation, and when they reach their destination, the old woman has vanished from the back seat. Fearing the worst, the men retrace the route, but do not find the woman anywhere. Finally, recalling their daughter's name, they go to the house in Montgomery to report what might have been a horrible accident. The men identify her from the photos in the woman's house. But as it happens, the old woman was buried just 3 years ago that day.